Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. I know we have some folks joining us, so I will start, and as folks join us, they can, we'll be getting more information and into the meat of the presentation. So first of all, thank you all for joining us this morning. My name is Stacy Violante-Cote, and I am the Director of Operations at the Center for Children's Advocacy. We are happy to present to you this morning a webinar, COVID-19 Resources and Critical Information for Professionals Working with Vulnerable Children and Youth. Hi all. You will hear from several presenters this morning, and I will introduce them shortly. Just to give you a sense of the Center for Children's Advocacy, if you're not familiar with us, the Center is a private nonprofit law firm. We were established in 1997. And we provide legal representation and advocacy for Connecticut's poorest, most at-risk children and youth. Our work is critical. We provide legal services in the area of abuse and neglect, racial justice, educational inequities, immigration, youth homelessness, juvenile justice, access to medical and mental health care. We have offices throughout Connecticut in Connecticut's cities. As you know, we are in the middle of an unprecedented pandemic. This COVID-19 pandemic, it particularly affects the children we all support, who are particularly vulnerable as the state battles this public health crisis. Our ability collectively to continue the work we do is challenged in so many ways, as we continue to help Connecticut's extremely vulnerable and at-risk children. The center is working diligently to determine resources, provide information as it becomes available, and we are also available for technical assistance for any of you if you should need it. At this time, we would also like to say thank you to all the medical staff and first responders. We appreciate all that you do to save lives. In a moment, you will see the center's webpage here on the screen. And we have on the webpage particularly a list of resources related to COVID-19. A little trouble advancing the slide. Here we are. You'll see here in the lower right-hand corner, this red box with COVID-19 information and resources. This presentation, along with a whole host of resources, is available for you on our website. And so feel free to go there and get all the latest information that we have available. We are recording this webinar, and we will have it available on the website there, as I just mentioned. So just a bit of housekeeping. If you have particular questions, please put them into the chat box, and we have a plan so that we can answer your questions right at the end of the webinar. Your presenters for today. We have attorney Alice Rosenthal with the Center's Medical Legal Partnership, attorney Stacy Schleif with the Center's Child Abuse Project, attorney Marisa Halm with the Center's Teen Child Youth Justice Project, and then we have a special guest, Scott Wells the Director of Options Education and Employment Services. This time, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Attorney Alice Rosenthal. She is a senior staff attorney with the Center's Medical Legal Partnership Project. She coordinates our partnership with Yale New Haven Hospital in our New Haven location. She will provide information about access to healthcare, benefits, and housing.
Thanks so much, Stacy. Everybody can hear me well, I hope. I'm a senior staff attorney at the center, working particularly in our New Haven office, but as you know, we're a statewide organization. So, but I work very closely with the providers and a lot of the medical people down at Yale New Haven Hospital. So I just want to again reiterate, we're sending out huge thanks for all of you out there on the front lines doing amazing work every day to keep our state safe and healthy. So the work that we do on the Medical Legal Partnership is we provide assistance to low-income families on legal issues impacting their health. So we do a lot of work around healthcare, education, benefits, and housing. And so today, for my few minutes, I'm just going to cover some of the basic needs that families have. And I have to say that I put these slides together yesterday, and by last night and this morning, things had already changed. So this is literally as of today, this morning, but please, we're going to have resources listed at the end. You just want to check every day because this stuff is changing minute to minute. And so although this is information that we're providing you in this moment, it could change as of Monday. And if you have any questions on any of this, definitely feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to answer any questions. So to start, I just want to talk about access to healthcare. As you know, or some of you might know that Access Health CT enrolls families who are uninsured into the markets. If they don't qualify for Husky, they'll connect them with another type of insurance. They typically have enrollment in the fall, but they opened the enrollment back up and it's now extended to April 17th to encourage people who don't have insurance to enroll in insurance. When they opened it up the last couple of weeks, 1,500 new people already applied. So please get the word out that it is extended again until April 17th. But in any case, people can always apply for health insurance if they have a qualifying life event, and the loss of coverage or the loss of income may be a life qualifying event that you would qualify for either Husky or health insurance on the exchange. So there's definitely a lot of options about getting coverage. For those who qualify for Medicaid and Husky, Husky has a whole, DSS, the Department of Social Services, has a whole list of exceptions that they've put forth and waivers during this pandemic. So if you go to their website, they have an ongoing list. They are suspending all co-pays for Husky. They are making sure that timeframes for renewal, if you were supposed to renew your Husky over the next month, that it will be extended all the way until July, and then for May extended into November. So we also want to make sure everybody's aware that non-emergency medical transportation is still available. If you have to go to the doctor through your Husky, you are eligible for transportation. There's been some misinformation out there, so we want to make sure families know that if they do need to go to the doctor, they do qualify for non-emergency medical transportation. And like I just said, there's a suspension of timeframes for Husky, but also for cash assistance and SNAP benefits, so that people who are supposed to send in their renewal forms, they are suspending that so that people will stay on with their health insurance, getting cash assistance and their SNAP benefits. And lastly, I just want to say, we're all very concerned about families who are undocumented and children who don't have coverage. Our office, along with our medical partners across the state, sent an urgent letter to the Department of Social Services, the governor, and the commissioner for DSS, requesting that undocumented children immediately be covered for health insurance. So they do. So hopefully they'll respond. That would be really exciting, and we'd love your support by reaching out to your legislators or anyone else. Stacey, if you could just forward to the next slide. I also want to talk about food security. I know food is a hot topic right now. As you hopefully know, all the schools are providing food distribution at the local level. It depends on what community you live in terms of where you can get access to that food and whether if you live in the town or not. There are lists on each district's website about where you can get it, or there's also an ongoing list through 211. In terms of SNAP benefits, like I said, they're extending all the SNAP eligibility, so people should be able to stay with their SNAP at least for the next 3 months without having to send in all the new paperwork. They should if they can, but they won't lose their SNAP benefits. And then just like in another executive order said that they are going to give emergency households in Connecticut who are receiving SNAP benefits, which means that every household will get the maximum benefit that they would be entitled to for their family household size, regardless of income, which is great. Meaning that we know that a lot of families run out of SNAP benefits in the middle of the month anyway, and that they're going to increase that on April 9th and then again on, I think, April 20th. So that's a great thing. But DSS is taking applications ongoing, although they're not in their offices. You can't go to lights. You can do it over the phone or online. So if you have families who are food insecure, who have lost their job and now might qualify for SNAP benefits, please encourage them to apply. I know we talk about kids mostly, but just for those of you who also work with adults, DSS has suspended the able-bodied work requirement for people without children to continue to get SNAP, because obviously most are not working out in the field, and so suspended that. I also wanted you to know for WIC, women and children are all working remotely now, their offices, so there's nowhere to go in, but they are answering calls. So if you are connected to a certain WIC office, please call them for information. Most of WIC is now on a card, so people are getting their cards reloaded remotely, and they are trying their best to be flexible about weight checks and other things that they need from providers, encouraging families not to go into the community. But WIC is still definitely an option for every family who already has it, but you can still also, they are also taking applications remotely. And as we've all been sending around emails, there are tons of food pantries and home deliveries still happening. They've gotten a lot of guidance about how to do it safely, but just to be clear, those change rapidly about how which food pantries have what. And so I didn't want to give you specific information, but you can always go to the 211 website, or in certain areas like here in New Haven, Clifford Beers and United Way and Community Foundation are all keeping up to date about the most recent food pantry going out on listservs. So please make sure you can always reach out to 211 for information about all of that. The third thing I wanted to cover briefly was income security. A lot of the families that I work with, that I'm sure you all work with, are losing their jobs and then are fearful of losing their homes. I wanted to say that the DS has suspended the temporary families with assistance, so cash assistance 1 month timeline. For those of you who don't know, if you get cash assistance, you only have a 21-month lifetime guarantee of getting cash assistance if you qualify. And so after the 21 months, you're no longer eligible in your lifetime, but there are some, and right now they have this 21-month timeline, which is great. So people can continue to get cash assistance. I also found out that that means that if you had already expired your 21 months, you can now apply and get cash assistance during the pandemic. So if people are strapped for cash and feel like they didn't qualify before, they might want to try again. They are again taking applications online, and I would encourage families to do that. You all know that unemployment benefits are also something that people can apply for, but there is a 211 Navigator page that they can do to check other benefits that they might be eligible for. Okay, next slide, Stace. And last two things is housing and utilities. I just want to talk about my last 2 minutes. All of you should know that all executions on evictions and ejectments have been stayed until May 1st at the earliest. We are anticipating that will probably get extended out. so that people, even if they already through the housing court, those have been stayed. Landlords can file for new evictions, but there are no courts open, and they will not move forward until after the pandemic. So people should not be worried about losing their housing. There is guidance from the federal government. Housing has similar stays of execution, but those go even into August. So, so that is definitely a benefit. In terms of public housing, for those families who lose their job, or please tell them to report their income to public housing, because it could lower their month payment that they have to pay. So they've also waived the requirement to change your income, so people can do it immediately. So please remind people to do that. Homeless shelters, they are trying to move a lot of families people living in homeless shelters into hotels across the state. But again, that's from locality to locality. But the Connecticut Coalition Against Homelessness has amazing information on their website and is doing great advocacy. We don't know about funds for eviction prevention, but I know that there was money for eviction prevention in the federal guidelines for the CARE legislation. So hopefully that will happen. I've reached out to some of the people here in New Haven locally. They don't have that money yet because evictions are still stayed, but once this is lifted, please reach out to 211 or our office or your local community action agency about whether there are funds for families to get money to pay their back rent. And then finally is utilities. I hope everybody knows there's a moratorium on all shutoffs, water, electricity, and gas. If people get shut off, they should call their company immediately, or they can call the Public Utilities Regulatory Agency, which is the state agency that oversees utilities. They will be able to assist and advocate for families. Also, as of last night, energy assistance was extended to June 1st. It was originally May 1st, so people should definitely still apply for energy assistance because they're still accruing bills even though they're not getting shut off, and can apply right now to make sure that they get help with those back bills. So thank you so much for listening. I will take questions at the end, and you can also email me after this or reach out to me after the presentation. Thanks, Stacy.
Thank you, Alice. And I will remind everybody that this information is available on our website, as I know we are having to speed through this. At this time, I would like to turn to our next presenter, who is Attorney Stacy Schleif. She's the Senior Staff Attorney with the Center's Child Abuse Project. She will talk about access to courts and DCF and provide some practical information and tips.
Thanks. Hopefully you can all hear me. Good morning. As the other Stacy said, I'm Stacy Schleif from CCA. I generally tend to do trainings that are geared more towards lawyers, and I'm aware that this is a mixed audience of various professionals. So I've tried to make these practical tips as broadly applicable as possible, but I do apologize in advance for anything that seems redundant or too basic in my allotted 7 minutes. So to start, Stacy, if you could flip the slide. Probably all your different organizations and agencies have issued their own directives about client contact by this point. But for the lawyers out there who are working for themselves or who have a contract with the state, the common theme does seem to be to follow the directive from the CDC, limiting all face-to-face contacts, strong recommendation against them, but obviously there are the exceptions to that. OCPD, the Public Defender's Office, has sent out, I think, 2 emails at this point with their guidance that, at least as of yesterday, they'd said that all placements by this point should be equipped to have virtual contact with child clients, whether that's foster homes, group homes, and it should also continue to be confidential. So that's a good thing. If that's not happening, definitely reach out to them to make sure that they're aware of that so they can address the issue. Calling, texting, FaceTime, Zoom, obviously are all good modes of getting in touch with clients at this point, where you have the younger clients who can't speak or who can't talk. they, you know, one idea we thought of was asking to have the caretaker have you get a virtual tour of their home, just showing them where the child is sleeping, where they're spending their time. With those younger clients too, connecting directly with their caretakers, their foster parents, their parents if they're still at home, social workers, any service providers, just trying to get a big wraparound picture of how the family is doing, how they're dealing with this situation. You know, the face-to-face contact, you know, one thing that I've thought of is if you have the older clients that or parents that you do want to continue to see, make sure they're not feeling isolated. There's nothing preventing you from going by their house and just meeting with them outside, obviously stand 10 feet apart, 6 feet apart. But there's not, you know, you can still do that assuming you're in a confidential space. DCF has done a great job keeping their website up to date, basically on a daily basis with how they're continuing to operate. So that's definitely a helpful resource to check out, and it's also linked on our website. If you could go to the next slide, Stace. So at this point, you know, I want to try to say it's business as usual with our clients. We should be checking in with every single client on our caseload. Part of OCPD's guidelines said that they're paying for up to an hour per client for the attorneys to have these virtual connections with their clients. So, you know, it's a good idea to be going through, checking in with every single client, see how they're doing. I made up a quick, just a little checklist for bullet points to hit with them. Making sure they're in a safe place, that they're aware of the situation that's going on in the world and in the local community, that they have access to healthcare if they need it, that any children that you work with or that are living with the parents have access to their online education, that they have the technology they need, that they have internet, you know, to access that technology, that they have adults there with them to assist with the online learning, to answer any questions that they have, that they're getting any special needs accommodated. Another thing to check in on is to make sure they have access to food and referring them to local food pantries or distribution centers where necessary, making sure that families are still getting to visit with each other if they're not together, kids in foster care getting to see their parents virtually at this point. Making sure the technology is available for that, and that there are regular visits being scheduled. Also making sure that any accommodations have been put into place at this point for services that the parents are supposed to be continuing to work on. And just a reminder for the attorneys out there that our ethical duties are still in play. So that duty of loyalty to your client, the duty to continue to do work for your client, and to keep their confidentiality. All right, next slide. So new cases are still being filed. They're still coming in. DCF, although some of their offices have closed for various reasons, they're still in business. They're still operating. The commissioner has said that all investigations at this point are starting, they start out as being remote. They're done virtually, but as needed, they are doing in-person responses as well, depending on the situation, if there's no alternate means to assess a situation. Courts at this point are closed indefinitely for routine matters, emergency matters, orders of temporary custody are still being filed, as well as if there are issues with visitation not happening, OCPD has said that those are motions that the court would entertain on a case-by-case basis. I'm sure very limited, but the variety of juvenile courts around the state at this point have all been consolidated to either Hartford or Bridgeport. So that's where, if you have an OTC, that's where it will be held depending on your region, and they should let you know that. Standby counsel for parents are still being appointed. The way they're doing that, the parents, at least as of earlier this week, the information I received is that the parents still go in, they still apply for their attorneys, and the attorneys are out in the parking lot waiting to meet with them and continue to represent them. Clerk's offices continue to be a good place to call with questions. And at this point, Connecticut is not conducting anything via video. So next slide. DCF is, like I said, still open for business. Emailing the social workers is definitely the way you're going to get the quickest response. From my experience, they've all been extremely responsive, probably more so than usual because they're not out in the field. The chain of command is still in effect, and social workers have actually been asked to check in even more regularly. My experience has been on a weekly basis with some of my clients. The older youth over 18 should be checked in with twice a week at this point via virtual means. ACRs are all being held as scheduled, but over the phone. And the directive from DCF is that a clear and consistent visitation schedule needs to be established for each family. So just lastly, there are some lingering issues out there, next slide, to be cognizant of in the coming weeks, and definitely let me know, let our office know if there are issues that you're encountering that you can't figure out an answer for. Specific ones that I had identified are just, or that we had talked about are how they're going to house youth who are in care, who test positive. There are limited resources out there now, limited foster homes willing to have these kids. What's happening to our youth in the detention facilities if they're ready for release and there's no place for them to go. And just making sure that that eyes and ears are on our more vulnerable child populations, those who are younger in age, those with disabilities. How is that going to be dealt with? Making sure that any work towards reunification is not being halted due to this virus. And that essentially is all I have for you now. I will definitely take questions at the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Stacy. All right, at this time, I will introduce our next presenter, who is Marisa Holm, Director of the Center's Teen Child Youth Justice Project. She will talk about the status of education directives and advocacy.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. I want to personally thank everybody here for the crucial work that you're doing on behalf of Connecticut's children and youth at this time during this crisis. My goal is to try to provide you with some basic information about the education landscape around, quite frankly, much of which the law remains unsettled. If you asked me personally a month ago if I could have ever foreseen our current situation where the doors of all of our public schools are closed and both students in suburban and urban districts are relegated to their homes for distance learning on platforms that have never been trialed, I could have never foreseen this situation. But regardless, it's April 3rd, and that is where we are. I know everybody, all of us at the center and many folks in the advocacy community remain concerned about how this situation poses a great threat to the education of all of our students, and in particular, students with disabilities, as well as students in the underprivileged communities that we serve. This slide is just an attempt to provide an overview of the law in this area. So we have federal guidance and regulations and laws, and we have state statute and guidance, as well as state executive order. As you know, in most scenarios, federal law supersedes state guidance. However, the right to a public education is conferred to you by your state. And so the right to an education would not exist without statute and constitution. So in this situation, we are getting, in the current crisis, we're having the federal government and federal agencies issue guidance. We have our governor issuing orders and guidance impacting education, and then we have state agencies such as the Department of Education issuing guidance. We have all this information coming from different areas in this unprecedented situation. That said, there's many questions that remain unresolved. In particular, the federal, under federal law, there's a host of, as we all know, for student disabilities under the IDEA. Those rights, in effect, they have not been waived. However, how those rights are going to play out in this crisis still remains to be seen. And that's something the center is extremely interested in and concerned about and wants to be a resource for folks on. Next slide, please. This slide just attempts to provide an overview of all the pieces of guidance and all the orders that have come out over the last month since the pandemic started. Each of these documents is available on our website on the COVID-19 resource page. So if you'd like to look at the full document, you can go there. We have obviously the federal guidance coming from the United States Department of Education and their Office of Civil Rights. We have orders from Governor Lamont, executive orders coming from Governor Lamont. And then we have the State Department of Education issuing its guidance. At the federal level, the first document, the Q&A that was provided by the Department of Education really sort of set the landscape for what's going on right now, reminding school districts at the local level that they be collaborating with their departments of education and their public health agencies to ensure the safety and health of all students. Most of these Q&As really dealt with what should happen if schools remained open. So some of it is not relevant any longer given schools have been closed. However, one salient point from this Q&A was that if school district decided to close and decided to offer education to general education students, it needs to ensure access to all students, including students with disabilities. The U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights later then issued 2 fact sheets, the first one of which really dealt with the scenario of protecting underrepresented students and at-risk students from discrimination. But this was in the scenario during which schools open. The second Office of Civil Rights fact sheet is the more salient one. It was issued shortly after the first one to clarify and strongly encourage school districts to offer distance learning to all students and to make such platforms available to students with disabilities, and to do best to try to provide a free and appropriate education to students through distance learning platforms. This she also touched upon, tried to provide some guidance around the time that exists under federal law and encouraged school districts to work with parents to mutually agree to postpone timelines that everybody was having during this. And the FAT also suggested that certain timelines and situations could be met if school districts and parents chose to convene via PPT meeting virtually. Then we have the group of executive orders from Governor Lamont, the first of which, 7E, is the one that relieves school districts of the requirement to hold school for 180 days. Subsequent to that, Governor Lamont issued Executive Order 7L, which has extended school closure to April 20th. We haven't seen anything extending school closure beyond that date. However, it's hard to imagine, especially with the recent order limiting social gatherings to 5 people or less, that we're going back to school anytime before May, if not the end of the school year. The Executive Order 7M potentially impacts hearings through the State Department of Education and those hearings that would occur for special education. This order postponed all administrative hearings by 90 days. Then the State Department of Education Bureau of Special Education state has issued 2 pieces of guidance, one on March 24th and one on March 31st. It's our understanding that they're working on additional guidance and more guidance will be forthcoming. The first piece of guidance encourage school districts that they need to communicate with families and students with disabilities directly and in an individual manner, and try to do so and create an individual plan for students during the period of school closure. The department also took the position of indicating that PPT meetings, the legal meetings that are held to develop plans for students with disabilities, do not need to be held during this period. Though saying they could be held in unique circumstances. And the department also indicated that certain timelines may run as a result of the crisis, and that school districts wouldn't be penalized for those timelines running. The second piece of guidance deals exclusively with the approved private special education programs and clarified that those programs should be closed, as all of their schools are, and should during this time frame also be providing distance learning like other schools are. Next slide, please. So some key points and takeaways from all this information are that this, as mentioned, school day and hours requirement for the current school year is waived. How that's going to be resolved remains to be seen. That school districts should make every single effort possible to offer distance and virtual learning to all students during this time of closure. And if this learning, and that is backed up by both state and federal guidance. Similarly, if learning is being offered during this period of school closure, it must be offered to all students, including students with IEPs. That is underscored by both state and federal guidance. The reality is access is an issue. The state is doing what it can to ensure access. There various internet providers across the state are providing internet service for free. This is working through it, the governor's task force on distance to ensure access to devices primarily for alliance districts. And specific to students with disabilities, I think the state made a point of saying individualized communication to families with who have students with IEPs is crucial at this time. School districts should be reaching out to these families. They should be individualizing plans for students to the greatest extent possible. The guidance also said that the PPT meetings are not mandatory. Now, it did indicate that PPTs could be held in unique circumstances. We think that there may be circumstances where PPTs should be held, and we'd like to assist with that. The guidance also indicated that certain timelines may not, districts will not be penalized for this timelines, for not making those timelines. And similarly, the guidance said that these days during school closures are not going to be considered school days for the purposes of certain timelines. Next slide, please. So what are some things, how can we ensure access for students during this unprecedented and uncertain time? I think the most important thing that we can underscore, as my colleagues have said, is that things are changing on a daily basis. Right now, educational offerings are varying vastly district by district. So in terms of trying to ensure access to education, make sure if you're that you're looking on a daily basis to to see what a specific district is offering, because those offerings are changing frequently. The reality is it's very unfortunate, something we remain concerned about. Students in alliance districts may experience an excessive delay in receiving some services, but try to stay on top of that. If a child that you're representing is not receiving any sort of access and a district is providing it, follow up with the district, put that in writing to an administrator. Building principals are, we're seeing that building principals, but also folks at central office are taking charge of this. Assist, if you can, your client in getting access to free internet and securing those devices in the alliance districts. During this period of closure, if possible, document what is not being provided to the student. This is especially crucial for special education students, trying to document what services are being provided and what's not being provided and what timeframes those things are occurring. Additionally, be prepared, and sort of further to that point, be prepared for when schools reopen to help your clients identify gaps in services and what clients' needs are upon schools reopening. One area that is a right for special education students where we haven't seen any guidance yet from the state or the federal government is extended school year. Special education students are entitled to consideration for extended school year services. Be aware of those and be prepared to advocate and ask for services in that regard, and also be on the watch out, and we will certainly have any updated information on guidance that may come out on that. If there is an issue of major concern with a program that a child is receiving during this period of school closure, request a meeting, request a PPT meeting. The district may not honor that, but put that request in writing. Offer to have that meeting virtually, which school districts are being, told that they can do, and which the law provides to happen in these scenarios. And most importantly, stay tuned for more information, because as we said, it's kind of changing on a daily basis. We know that the State Department of Education is currently working on a number of initiatives, and they are providing regular learning for both parents and school districts. And so their website, which is listed here, has a wealth of resources for folks as well. My colleague, I just wanted to mention here, which was already mentioned by my colleague, Alice Rosenthal, the fact that obviously school meals are a crucial form of food security during this time, and that information is available on individual schools' websites. That's all I have right now. Again, I would like to both myself and my colleague, Catherine Meyer, who are very involved with education at the Center for Children's Advocacy. We want to remain a resource for folks, and we remain concerned about the rights of students with disabilities in particular. So please feel free to reach out to us at the end of this presentation or the fact. And now I have the opportunity and pleasure of introducing our colleague Scott Wells, who's an MA in CESP. He is Director of Options, Employment, and Educational Services. Options is a school that is an approved private special education program here in the state of Connecticut, and they provide a little beacon of hope and light in this current pandemic. And Scott's going to talk a little bit about some of the distance learning education that he's offering to his students program. Scott?
Hi, everyone. Welcome, fellow Zoomies. This is kind of a first for me, so I'm going to try to do well. So looking at our students in this crisis, we really look at how are we going to implement ambitiously appropriate goals to the greatest extent possible. Because that's really our charge. And to give you a frame of reference of what we're doing and how we responded, we're an approved private special ed program, also for transition services. We're located in a large home turned into a small school. We have 26 students. Many have ED, such as anxiety, OCD, PTSD, thought disorder, mood disorders, etc. Some of our students have LD, executive functioning troubles, attentional issues, traumatic brain injury. Overall, they all suffer from a level of depression and a level of PTSD from traumatic childhoods and the journey that they've taken within their education. So we provide them a really supportive, ego-friendly environment, highly individualized, and we engage students in habilitative and rehabilitative learning, which really is helping them get back on the track to a natural course of growth, but also help them with symptoms and issues that prevent their developing or becoming competitive in academics and vocational. They spend half a day with certified teachers, and they spend half a day with vocational counselors, those kids that need credits. Our transition kids spend more time in the community. But all of our kids spend time in the community on live job sites and training sites and live higher ed programs. We have kids in restaurants, automotive shops, EMT, coding. We've got kids at Manchester Community. We've got some that are applying to Goodwin. And some take certification programs in the community, which we support with them. We have 2 LCSWs, a BCBA, speech and language, and a certified school counselor. And pretty much every day we provide mental status check-ins with our students. We have contact with families as issues arise or they want to give us a heads up. It's very interactive with the students and the families and the students' treatment providers outside of us. I think it's important for folks to know that as we're trying to implement the kids' goals and objectives, that we really have to document. We have to document every contact we've had with them. Fortunately, prior to this crisis, we had a really good documentation system in place. Every teacher and staff has a learning plan, and we have online models for them to document every interaction and progress toward goals and objectives. So when it hit, we were pretty much not taken by surprise because we knew it was coming, a closure, but it was quite a process. And the first thing we did is we had to identify the needs of the students and review our resources. And the biggest need was the emotional support, is our kids were scared. We also had to maintain their current connections to our staff and the routine and their schedule we thought was important. Provide reassurance that this is temporary and it will not be permanent. And also recognize that they're going to be nervous about losing credit. And then the last we recognized is they really had to hold on to their hope, and we had to guide them in that. So initially we onboarded some IT folks and had 2 days of training. We're currently using Zoom and Google Classroom and other online resources that we found. We made virtual home visits to families. We had tech people go to the houses. We had tech people go to our staff's houses, make sure everything was set up okay. And then clinically, our clinical folks pretty much were already familiar with Doxy.me and Jitsu for email. So initially, our teachers and staff brought materials home. We mailed materials to students. Then we started quickly dropping materials off to students and to the families. And we still maintain a courier service to do that as they need materials. And then all our staff are sharing their internet resources, and our supervisors are speaking to the families and the students and our staff, if not daily, certainly every other day. And then there is a end of the week check-in with all the families. And any materials I mentioned in here, and these are certainly not all our materials, if you wanted to contact me, I will be welcome to share everything that we have as a resource for you. Some of the materials that teachers are using you might be familiar with Khan Academy, IXL. They're also sourcing their own materials appropriate to their student. And also the districts have put up some of them on their website, COVID-19 pages, where they're offering pretty good links to material. Vocationally, we use the EPIC program, and CAPS, COPES, COPS is one of our tools. There's online exploration sites, there's YouTube, and my staff are also starting to set up virtual informational interviews with industry professionals. So if we have a young man interested in heavy equipment operation, then we can simply call folks that in, and we're finding that lots of people want to be helpful, and we can create Zoom informational interviews. And we really feel like that really helps the students stay connected out there. So week one was really all hands on deck. Students started with their same schedule, their same teachers. We kept everything predictable, and we had to identify the bugs, and they were accustomed to the schedule, so it really was a good starting idea. What we found out during that week, that the kids were pretty stressed, and that everyone's learning curve is not the same, and we have to have a lot of patience with students and some of the staff learning. And the other is, it's a great time to hit high interest materials. It's really important to engage the students to fill their time, but also just to be healthy. We learned as much as the constant schedule was important in the beginning, that it needed to change. Students ran into issues as disturbed sleep, increased stress, and they are also taking family roles of watching a younger sibling or be staying with a grandparent, because many of our families still have to go to work to support themselves. Week two, we had to review the attendance, time on task, responses to distance learning, and we started out with mental health checks, mental status checks, how are the students feeling, conversations with the parents. Increasingly, we found some students were more productive using distance learning models, which is kind of diagnostic in their interpersonal realm of how they present. And most students pretty much remain the same productivity with us, but we do have students where their symptomology has increased due to the stress, and we've got some students that have regressed into old patterns of isolation. So we've started interventions with the students, first initially the ones that have regressed most, as we still provide supports to the other families. We're also, with the second week, looking at supplemental learning, which is just because a student's not assigned to a particular staff when COVID-19 hit. We do have staff with similar interests, such as a basketball coach on staff that also, we have a student with a high interest in basketball. So now we're adjusting schedules to start getting them involved, just to add more quality and quantity of time with the student and support them at home. Our staff have increased mindfulness activities. We found some courses online. Our staff are going for virtual walks with the students. They're planning budgets and meals, and as the students go shopping with their family or with some of their group home staff, they're cooking. We're planning to cook together remotely with them. Some examples of our students, their programs, and this is where it's important that they're quality programs. We have an automotive program, so our automotive instructor is studying ASE certificates, which they would have been doing if they were in school. They're doing that virtually, and we can also proctor a test virtually, and we are a proctor for those tests. There are also, I've got an EMTI on board, which is an EMT instructor. And that instructor is working with two of our young ladies that decided that was a course they wanted to explore, and they're preparing for their practicals in June. Prior to this, they were writing and accompanying some EMTs with their services. And we already just started our partnership with St. Francis, but we were not able to start that. We have a young lady that's interested in writing, has always been a writer. And we're introducing a grant writing program to her to do online with us. And we've also spoken to an animal care hospital where they're looking for additional grant writers. So when we are all open again, we're going to make that connection And, you know, it provides her some hope as to what is she going to do afterwards, and that she's still progressing.
Thank you. This is Stacy. I hate to interrupt you because I know this is super valuable information. I just have to leave a few minutes here for folks to be able to send us any questions in the chat box.
I am all set. I got 2 more sentences.
Go for it.
So, you know, if we could use any help out there, we need to stay active and in business with our students. It's very vague as to what's going to happen and what rules we follow, but we know we have to follow the rules of implementing the IEPs well to the students. So anyone that would like to follow up and get more information, happy to contact me. But thank you, Stacy.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. And thank you to all our presenters. We are available for questions. I know there was a point in here about materials such as adaptive sensory equipment, and I know Marisa wanted to speak to that for a moment. So I'll turn it over to you, Marisa, to answer that. And then if others have questions, please type them here in the chat box.
Yes, so our child advocate, Sarah Egan, made a really good point in the chat box here that we should be thinking about, particularly for students with disabilities and maybe students with more severe disabilities, the need that they will have for not just a device, but other equipment, whether it be adaptive equipment or sensory equipment or special apps to help them access education at this time, that those sorts of things may be required to provide any sort of access to distance learning. And that we should, if you're in a situation representing a student like that has those needs, you should have the ability to advocate for it. And this is where requesting a meeting would be something that we would suggest that you do, whether it be a PPT meeting or a meeting with the district. And if you are seeing students who have these needs and districts are not responding to those needs and to requests for meetings to have bona fide discussions about additional adaptive equipment that a student might need to access distance learning, then we want to be a resource for that. You should definitely reach out to our office, and you may be able to reach out to the Office of the Child Advocate as well.
Great, thank you, Marisa. And I will lift up a point here that Agata has made in the chat box that any related services and in-home services that aren't being provided are also good reasons to request a PPT or a school meeting. So at this time, we want to thank you all for joining us on this presentation today. We do have some resources listed at the end of the PowerPoint, and this will all be available shortly on our website at cca-ct.org/COVID-19 resources. And we hope that you all remain safe and healthy, and we will be in touch shortly as new information becomes available. Thank you again.